Hi everyone, welcome to my reading club. Thank you for joining us tonight. So it's 9:02 already. Should we start? Our guest speaker, are you ready? Can I start?
Yes, anytime. Yeah.
All right. Okay. So we will start our session for tonight. So as usual, I will just read the house rules first, and then we'll get started with our session for tonight. So, hello, welcome to Mao Reading Club. Mao, short for Monsters Among Us, is a group of youth that empowers children and survivors of child sexual abuse through a myriad of programs such as advocacy, education, and community involvement in hope to pave a safer way for childhoods. In line with the 2020 Sustainable Development Goals of quality education and gender equality, Mau Reading Club is an avenue for all youth in and out of Malaysia to discuss and ponder upon important issues relating to us. Treat this reading club as your safe space because we practice no judgments and prejudice towards anyone out there. For the purpose of ensuring our reading session to run smoothly while safeguarding everyone's comfort, Mao would truly appreciate if we can adhere to the house rules below. So, the house rules, the first one is respect. When you are not talking, please mute the microphone by turning it off so that the session will not be interrupted by weird noises. Mao wishes for everyone to please be respectful of others, especially in discussing a certain topic or subject. Please be mindful of others when they are speaking by interjecting politely, and we would appreciate it if everyone can join the session by using their names or nicknames so that we can properly address each other. Second, participate and engage. We welcome everyone who wishes to speak up during the session either by asking questions or sharing their inputs. We do not tolerate discrimination and harassment on one's sexual orientation, belief, and preferences. We reserve the rights to remove you from the session. We welcome differences in ideas, opinions, and views because we understand that each and every one of us has different foundations that shape us on how we see things. We also understand if you are not comfortable to speak by using the microphone, so do type it out. So do type it out in the chat box. Everyone deserves to be heard, and this is a fun session. No one has to use huge jargons if you do not want to. Last but not least, consent and privacy. This session will be recorded. If any of you feel uncomfortable about it, please provide your feedback to us. Our YouTube channel is available if you want to watch the recorded session later on. And please ask first before you want to record anything from the session for whatever purposes. Some may be a camera shy, which is totally fine and understandable. Please do not quote anything from the session without getting permission from the sayer, and it is okay if you wish not to show your face by turning the video off because it is your face, so you get to choose what you want to do with it. Last but not least, enjoy the session to your heart's content. We hope everyone will get something from from this session. So for today's session, we have a guest named Aidil, and he is 22 years old. He's from an organization, I believe, called My Hutan. So the topic we are going to discuss today is youth advocacy in biodiversity protection. So he quoted that 1 million species at risk of extinction, many could be gone within decades. So that sounds very interesting, a very different topic from what we have done before. Usually, our if you guys have joined our sessions previously, we would discuss issues relating social issues. So usually the issues that we are facing in real life around us. But this topic for tonight is very fresh and new, so we are pretty excited. So I'm inviting our guest speaker now, Aidil, to share your screen because I was informed that he has the slides. So enjoy, everyone.
All right. First and foremost, thank you so much for inviting me here today. Just to ask, can everyone hear me quite well? Yeah. Okay. So that's perfect. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. I've noticed that your organization does have like this tendency going towards social issues, especially impacting children. But today we're going to talk about biodiversity, which is why I understand a lot of you would think that it's an environmental issue, but biodiversity transcends social environment. It touches on the livelihoods of poor people, of communities, whether they're urban or rural. So today I'll just be really browsing through my slides. So I'll just prepare them right now. Okay. Okay, so can everyone see this slide right here? Okay. Okay. All right. Let me just. Okay, so today I'll be presenting about generation restoration, youth advocacy, and biodiversity protection. As you are well informed earlier, I am from My Hutan, and My Hutan is a movement under Undi 18, one of the movements under Undi 18 that is the only movement focusing on conservation of nature or environmentalism, and we are focused on sustainable financing of forest conservation in Malaysia, as well as building political engagement with leaders from various political parties, as well as governmental officials. So that's just a very brief background of what My Hutan. So when on World Environment Day this year, the United Nations decided to make this statement, to make this call that 2021 until 2030 will be the decade on ecosystem restoration. Previously, there were targets made by the United Nations as well as other organizations called the Aichi Targets, or formerly known as the Aichi Biodiversity Targets. It was a 10-year plan where people could make commitments towards biodiversity conservation, and it failed. So within from 2010 until 2020, the Aichi targets failed. So the United Nations decided that 2021 until 2030 will be the decade on ecosystem restoration, while countries are fully committed in rehabilitating degraded ecosystems. And that's why there was this big movement on social media that was hashtag generation restoration, because we should be the generation that restores our ecosystem. So the next slide would be just the part one of this session is basically understanding the biodiversity crisis, what we understand about how is it declining, what's causing it, and what's happening and everything. A lot, as I mentioned before, a lot of people would have this perception that biodiversity is very much only interconnected with the environment. That is actually false, because a lot of the things that we depend on, food, water, or other forms of natural resources, come from biodiversity. For example, the water that we drink are dependent on freshwater ecosystems that in the whole world right now, just to give it you in a simple phrase, is that the whole world, almost 70% of the world is covered by water. And most of the water that's covering the earth happens to be oceans, and very small percentage of the water covering the earth is freshwater. And within that small percentage of freshwater, only 1% of freshwater is accessible for everyone. And in that 1% of freshwater, ecosystems like lakes, rivers, deltas, and everything is degraded by pollution, climate change, exploitation, and so on. So that is one example that we depend on when it comes to biodiversity. If we're talking about wildlife, we depend on food that comes from pollinators like bees and butterflies and so on. And I know that everyone here, not everyone, but most of you do like to eat durians or petai. Did you know that the pollinators for petai and durian happen to be bats, klawa, or flying foxes? Or so they happen to be the ones that are pollinating to make sure that your durians are healthy, to make sure that your petai is healthy. So a lot of the misconception that farmers have is that these bats are going to eat these durians. But the thing is, those bats don't eat the fruits. They only eat the nectar from the durian flower. So when pollen gets stuck to its fur, it flies to another tree, and that's when cross-pollination occurs, and that's when more trees of durians become more healthy. So a lot of the things that we depend on, a lot of the king of our fruits cannot pollinate itself. So if farmers think that bats are pests, they would have to make the pollination happen by themselves. They would literally have to climb up there and pollinate themselves. So why leave it to people when nature can do it? So next slide would be this Stark report by ITBES. So ITBES is the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. So a global assessment was made a few years ago, and it was a global assessment by from experts from 50 countries, collecting data of government research, university research, and as well as NGO research. And they concluded that 1 million species of flora and fauna are threatened at extinction, that many could be gone within decades. In this Stark report, in this first time report, it highlights that three quarters of land, one slash three of land is already degraded. Only, I believe the correct percentage is 70%, 75% of land in the world is already degraded by human actions. That only 25% of the world's land-based environments are intact from human actions. 66% of marine environments, our oceans, have been significantly altered as well. Um, According to this report as well, an estimated of like 500 land-based species of all the 5.9 million land-based species, they don't have enough habitat for long-term survival unless ecosystem restoration is happening. Also, within this report, it also recorded that wetlands, for example, wetlands are basically hutan paya bakau, mangroves, or peatlands and peat swamps and so on. They are falling apart, declining 3 times faster than our forests. And they don't get the same enough attention as forests or any other habitats or ecosystems. It's also been reported that freshwater species are the most threatened species on Earth, declining at a 84% since the 1970s. So a lot of the focus has been, on marine mammals or tigers or lions or African animals, but not a lot of them are focused on freshwater animals that happen to be, most of them are fish or turtles and so on. But they are declining at a rate that are faster than any other animal on this planet. Um, so that is the highlights of ITBES global assessment. I highly encourage you guys to read it. There are mentions of plastic pollution that have increased tenfold. Mentions of invasive species per country have increased up to 70% and so on. So there are stark data, but also as well as solutions that they can give to you individually, or how policymakers can make a difference, or how the governments, NGOs, and corporations can make a difference as well. So that's something that you can eventually read in the future. So the worrying state of Malaysia's biodiversity is very much, apparent. We've seen what's happening to Tasik Chini, which is a ecosystem that has been recognized by UNESCO years ago. But get this, it was only gazetted, it's still in the process of being gazetted 2 years ago. So it has not been officially gazetted by the Pahang state government, but it was mentioned to be gazetted 2 years ago. So it's really conflicting when UNESCO, an international movement organization, recognizes Tasik Chini, but we, specifically the Pahang state government, has failed to do so. There are many examples of how biodiversity in Malaysia is falling behind. For example, the overall health of coral reefs in Malaysia is considered to be fair, but has been declining slowly in the last 5 years, according to Reef Check Malaysia. And just yesterday, we celebrated International Tiger Day. And the Malayan tiger population in Malaysia has decreased up to 95% since Malaysia's independence in 1957. The current population of Malayan tiger in Malaysia is estimated to be less than 200. There are even mentions of it just being 150 million tigers left. But I think just earlier this month, specifically specifically on the 1st of June, a Malayan tiger, as well as four other cubs of her cubs, were found in a palm oil estate in Terengganu. So imagine this five Malayan tigers captured on a camera tap in a palm oil estate, representing 2.5% of the current Malayan tiger population. Just one camera trap alone signifies that only 2.5% of Malayan tigers that we have. And tigers are amazing species. They help to make sure that the ecosystem is stable by hunting ungulates like deers or wild boars and so on. But the thing is, not a lot of this is mentioned when it comes to talking about Malayan tigers, is that they're horrible hunters. They are horrible. Only 1 in 10 attempts of capturing a sambar deer will they be successful. 1 in 10. So that's how unsuccessful their rates of hunting. And that's a problem. How this is a problem is because sambar deers are also declining. There are only about 500, 1,000 sambar deers in Peninsula Malaysia. So, so there are problems like these, as well as poaching and habitat loss and so on. So this is the current state that some examples that I can give to you when it comes to Malaysia. The next slide is seeing value in nature. A lot of the conversations that happen when you talk to politicians, because I sometimes do when it comes to my work in Mai Hutan, is that politicians say that there's no value in protecting nature. One of the statements that Menteri Besar Kedah made about Ulu Muda. Ulu Muda is a forest reserve in Kedah, and it's a water catchment area. And when it was given protection, the Menteri Besar Kedah complained that logging could not be done because they were losing tons of money because logging could not be done in Ulu Muda. But what he doesn't understand is that Ulu Muda literally supplies water to 3 states, Penang, Perlis, and Kedah. Just one ecosystem alone supplies water to 3 states. So some of the examples is that when you're trying to project these ideas of making sure that nature does have value. So these are examples that I can give. Is that coral reefs in Malaysia are valued up to 1.74 million ringgit every year for their ecosystem and economic services that they provide. And these services include carbon sequestration, fish breeding, tourism, coastal protection. So coral reefs are valued up to millions of ringgit in Malaysia every year, but somehow they are degraded by fish bombings, climate change, and any other forms of pollution. An example of marine protected areas, for my example number 2, is that Malaysia doesn't have a lot of marine protected areas. So marine protected areas are basically those Pulau Pangko, Pulau Tioman, all those tourism destinations that you see where fishing is not allowed, where it's only for tourism, learning, conservation, and so on. So one of the marine protected areas, for example, is Pulau Payar in Langkawi. So when it became gazetted as a marine protected area, that area managed to rejuvenate the population of ikan bilis. So, so when you allow a marine protected area to stay protected, fish will be allowed to breed, to mate, to make sure that they, the natural cycle of marine species. Whereas in an area designated for fishing, you would not allow them to breed, to mate, to repopulate. But an example of Pulau Paya is near a fishing settlement. So when a marine protected area is protected and fish is allowed to rejuvenate, fish will jump into fishing territories where fishermen's catch will double, triple, tenfold, where their catches will eventually increase thanks to marine protected areas. This is called a spillover effect, where fish, when from one protected region, is allowed to rejuvenate and will jump into a region where fishing is allowed. Example 3 is when it comes to mangrove forests in Matang Pera. Well-managed forests of mangroves, or sustainably managed, where it's given protection, can support fisheries up to 423 million ringgit a year. That is how much it can support fisheries in Malaysia, supporting the livelihoods of fishermen, as well as the protection of mangrove species. So value in nature is existent. There is value when it comes, there is economic value in biodiversity, especially when you protect it, especially when it supports the livelihoods of fishermen, coastal communities, orang asli, as well as communities that are dependent on natural resources. So the next slide that I'll be presenting is understanding the role of youth in protecting biodiversity. If you notice, prior to the pandemic, before COVID-19 hit, we had these climate strikes, climate protests that were happening in KL, Penang, Sabah, Sarawak, and so on. The ones who were leading these protests happened to be young people from various organizations like Greenpeace, Amnesty International, Climate Action, and so on. I've had many friends from Malaysian youth delegation who were leaders of these protests. So it's very apparent that young Malaysians are pioneers of these actions against unsustainable development. When it comes to fighting against climate change, pollution, overfishing, biodiversity loss, we have to be the last generation to address these crises. We cannot allow that to have that to allow future generations, our children, our grandchildren, to be dealt with a destabilized planet with no sightings of Malayan tigers. We are literally the last generation right now, Gen Z and millennials included as well, to have seen the loss of the last Sumatran rhino who died in Sabah in Malaysia. We were the last generation to see this Sumatran rhino, Tam, who died from I believe cancer in Sabah. So we were basically the last. So could we allow ourselves to see future extinctions of Malayan tigers, of Asian elephants, hornbills, and other iconic species? If we can't allow that to ourselves, we definitely cannot allow for future generations to see that as well. From movements like the climate strikes, as well as Pinang Tolak Tambak, young Malaysians have always been pioneers of conservation, especially when it comes to collective action. Today's session is also being led by young people that I see here. Protests on that's happening tomorrow is also being led by young people. Undi 18, Nurul Rifaya, is as young as 18 years old, but was denied public university access because of her suit against the government to lower the voting age. So what is happening in those political platforms is also happening in the environmental space, where forums like these exist and also are curated by young people. And we are always the voice of confrontation. We are always the voice of creating petitions to sign, making sure to send to letters and emails to our MPs or aduns. We have always been that kind of voice. It's just that a lot of these, statements or presence of older politicians, they would say things like, yes, young people, we agree, speak up and everything. But in the end, they do nothing. We do have to make sure that we collectively find our voice together and collectively try to push and criticize them. So the next one is basically teaching you how to utilize social media for environmental advocacy. It's what I've been doing for 3 years. It's what has been, what has placed me in this position to speak to be privileged enough to speak at these sessions with you guys as well as other organizations, is because of social media presence. One keynote that I would love to give out is to visualize facts, data, and news. It's easy when you see a news has been posted or everything. But how do you make sure that the news you want to tweet or the news that you want to post gains traction, gains momentum, gains reshares, retweets, and so on? I would advise not to just copy paste the headlines and then post it. I would advise you to briefly describe what is happening in the article as your caption, and then the headline, and then post it for more traction for people just to understand what's happening in the news. Another form of visualizing facts, data, and news is that how can you make the public imagine a form of environmental degradation? You know, how can you make sure that a person can understand what forest loss is to him? So a lot of these, articles, data, they would mention forest loss in hectare. You know, how many hectare has been lost because of unsustainable development and so on. So what I always try to project is to make sure that how much 2,000 hectare of forest being deforested is converted or is equivalent to how many football fields, or how many size of country, or how many size of state. For example, in Hutan Tenggaro in Johor, um, it was planned that up to 2,000 hectare of forest of Hutan Tenggaro was supposed to be converted into a palm oil plantation, and that total 2,000 hectare of Hutan Tenggaro is as 6 times the size of Putrajaya. So that's how big it is, just to make room for palm oil. And so how, when you convey that kind of message, it makes people raise their eyebrows. It makes people like feel shocked and everything, because that's how big we're dedicating a whole forest just for palm oil, literally cutting down thousands of hundreds of species of plants just to plant for one species of plant, which is palm oil. So that's how you visualize data, and how you visualize forest loss, or other environmental issues, to make sure that people can connect to it, because approachability matters. Um, Another thing that when it comes to visualizing is, of course, making sure which specific area of social media you want to choose to convey your message. Whether you're creating petitions or hashtag movements. For example, is creating petitions. Petitions are very easily made and very easily accessible on Instagram. There has been a lot of petitions on Instagram, infographics on Instagram, especially by movements like the Loud Asians, Hakam Youth, Missy Solidarity, Undi 18. So Instagram is the best place for you to create petitions, and it's always great to tag these other NGOs for them to give your post a boost. Um, some examples that I would give for you to have, to be inspired in terms of design would be, of course, Missy Solidarity, Hakam Youth, the Loud Asians, Earthrise Studio, Everything Climate Change. These are some of the movements on Instagram that are very, very well at visualizing infographics in terms of social issues, as well as environmental issues. So these are just examples that you could see online, and you could do it yourself. One platform that I suggest using in terms of designing infographics is, of course, Canva. It is what I'm using today for this presentation. So a lot of the templates are already there. The designs, the elements, the shapes, the aesthetic is already there. So Canva is great because it's free. You have to pay more. You have to pay for certain templates, certain elements, but most of the stuff there are free. So Canva is a great platform for you to start designing infographics or posters when it comes to these things. So the next one is on participation. Participation is key when it comes to climate action or halting biodiversity loss. It's also making sure which NGOs connect to you the most. I always encourage young people to volunteer or support a youth-led movement that caters to their academic needs and experience, as well as passion. For example, if you are from a from a mass communications background, where do you feel like you would place yourself in an NGO? Is it a communications campaigner like myself? Which NGO feels like to you communicates best in terms of infographics, in terms of language, and so on? So if you are a policy making student who's very into policies and decision making and leadership, there are NGOs like Malaysian Youth Delegation, who does great work in policies regarding climate change. If you feel like what is happening today, actually, what right now, is that environmentalism is so much jargon, is always in English, it's never in Bahasa Melayu. There are always NGOs like Kuasa Perak or Climate Action. They always try to convey whatever they're projecting in terms of activism in Bahasa Melayu to make sure that it's accessible to the public. So, if you want to join something that is politically involved, there's always Undi 18 and its movement My Hutan. So it's choosing which NGOs suits you the best in terms of academic experience as well as your passion. Another thing that I would love to address is networking with these NGOs. If you're already part of an NGO, it's best to network with other youth-led movements in terms of collaborations or events. But most importantly is the solidarity against unsustainable development. When you're drafting a statement letter to Menteri Besar Selangor about the degazettement of Kuala Langat North Forest Reserve, you need the backup of multiple NGOs to make sure that this development is halted, right? So that's when it comes handy when you participate in these NGOs and enforce a sense of solidarity with other groups of young people who are like-minded as well. So I think this is some of the NGOs here: My Hutan, Kuasa Perak, Project Vocal, Malaysian Youth Delegation, Climate Action Malaysia. These are some of the NGOs that I highly suggest you guys participating, supporting, volunteering. Just reach out to us. If you feel like you need to collaborate, if you need to participate, I'm from My Hutan. I'm definitely open to suggestions and so on. So feel free to do so later. So the next one is promoting inclusion in conservation. Sometimes it's very much regarded that, in webinars and forums, it tends to be, when it comes to conservation or nature and everything, it tends to go to be classist, elitist, and so on. And one of the problematic ways that forums and webinars are contributing is an all-male panel to make sure that all, sometimes I've also, seen a lot of panel discussions where the panel are not gender diverse or gender balanced. So this is a problem that we have to tackle as well to make sure that women are represented in terms of decision-making, leadership, and so on. When promoting inclusion in conservation of biodiversity is to make sure that vulnerable or marginalized groups have a voice across decision-making, leadership, and policies. Some of the examples that I can give is gender-responsive climate action. A lot of people do not think that, a lot of people assume that climate change affects everyone the same, but it doesn't. Climate change does affect everyone, but it doesn't affect everyone in the same way. It affects different groups differently. So for women, in countries like Uganda, a research that was done on a wetland community, because of climate change, there was longer periods of drought. So women have to walk longer distances to fetch water. So when there is a drought in Uganda, their food security is destabilized, is affected. So women, unfortunately, have to trade sexually with farmers, with shopkeepers, with rent owners just to live. Children from families of Ugandan wetland communities have to sell their children into early marriages to cope with food scarcity. This is all fueled by climate change. In a palm oil research in one of the African countries, there was this palm oil estate, and around the estate is a forest. So to go through the forest, you have to go through the palm oil. So the palm oil is guarded by militants, by bodyguards, and so on, because people have been stealing palm oil from that plantation. So women, when they go into the palm oil plantation to go into the forest to hunt or to fetch food, water, and so on, these bodyguards would rape them, would say that if you want to pass through this plantation to go to the forest, you would have to have sex with me. So these are some of the inequalities that women have to face when in vulnerable regions in light of palm oil being unsustainable with climate change. So it's to make sure that gender responsive climate action happens, to make sure that women have opportunities, capacities, equitable access to resources and benefits, as well as participation and influence regarding the climate crisis. Another example in promoting inclusion in conservation is through indigenous knowledge or indigenous people partnership and participation. It's to make sure that orang asli are, well funded to be in terms of decision making, leadership, and policies. This has been translated in many things. One of the cases in Malaysia is that is Roya Belum in Perak. Is a state park of forest in Perak, and they hired these orang asli tribesmen from the Jahai people to be the anti-poaching patrollers at Arroyo Belum. And since they were hired, Arroyo Belum has faced almost zero poaching incidents. Almost zero poaching incidents after hiring indigenous people in Arroyo Belum. So that shows that indigenous people have knowledge of the land. They have indigenous capacity and resources that they can use because they have been living here for decades and having a more stronger connection with nature. It's also been presented globally. So globally, in the entire world, only 5% of the world's population is indigenous people. Only 5% of the world's population is orang asli, whether they're from South America to Malaysia to Indonesia, only 5%. But 80%, 80% of global biodiversity is protected by indigenous people. So this means that when indigenous people have full ownership to their land, degradation of habitats happen less. It shows that in protected areas of indigenous people, biodiversity is well protected. So this has not been translated to Malaysia in terms of policymaking or leadership. We only see that it happening in anti-poaching patrollers and so on, but we don't see it in science conservation. We don't see it in politically. We don't see it in terms of economics and so on, or governance. It's usually just hiring orang asli to be patrollers, but it's never more than that. It's not. So we can definitely do more to make sure that indigenous people are leaders in conservation, especially in Malaysia, where they have so much knowledge, they have so much capacity to make a difference. So what are the things, that I want to give out before I end this session is what can you do today to make a difference? One of the examples that I gave earlier was Hutan Tegaro. So Hutan Tegaro was a forest reserve. It was Hutan Simpan Tegaro in Johor. And it is now privately owned by the Sultan of Johor. It has been removed of its status of Hutan Simpan and has been privately owned by the Sultan of Johor to be converted into palm oil. So right now, what you can do is that there is an EIA assessment report. There is an EIA process, which is basically environmental impact assessment. They are asking for public feedback. So if you see here, there's a post here by My Hutan, which is already also available at My Hutan, is that we need your public feedback to reject this form of unsustainable agriculture. Because I work at a palm oil sustainability certification, so I feel bad already to be a part of it. But I believe that palm oil can be sustainable and can be deforestation free. And this is definitely not deforestation free. We have no need to expand for palm oil. We already have enough. So Hutan Tegaro needs to be saved. So one of the ways you can do it is by scanning this QR code or going to My Hutan where the post is available. And you can access a public feedback where you would have to reject the idea, give your email, and so on. So this is one of the ways that you can do today that makes it different tomorrow, because the due date is 5th of August. So you can do it as fast as you can, or as long as it's before 5th of August. So Hutan Tegaro definitely needs you. And the thing is, yesterday we celebrated International Tiger Day, and Hutan Tegaro is a critical habitat for Malayan tigers. So this is quite conflicting and hypocritical when we are celebrating a significantly important day for Malayan tigers, but at the same time we're allowing this kind of unsustainable monoculture agriculture in Johor. Another way you can do is by going to Project Youth on Instagram, and they have a template where you can email to your MPs or adults about biodiversity loss, climate crisis, pollution. They already have a template, which means that they already have a full essay you only have to put what issues you are passionate about, what's your name, where are you from, what's your constituency, who are you emailing to. So Project Youth does a great thing when it comes to these things. So this is a great way for you to politically connect with your MPs. I know it would take a long time for them to reply. Mine has not replied yet. So, it's very, hard to penetrate that situation. But it's also making sure that you don't give up. You can give them a call. Sometimes I've been informed that they are faster on Twitter to respond, on Instagram, on Facebook. But basically, use this template by Project Youth available on their Instagram for you to email to your MPs and other political leaders of your constituency. So that is what you can do today that makes a difference tomorrow. So this are the two steps that you can do now, tonight, and everything. So that basically concludes my session for today. I'm very grateful to be here sharing my thoughts on biodiversity protection and the youth advocacy involved to it. This is how you can contact me as well as my organization, My Hutan. I've prepared you here my social media platforms as well as my email address. If you have any questions regarding the environment, if you feel like you need My Hutan to boost an event or you want to collaborate on something, feel free to do so. And so, yeah, thank you so much for today. And I'm looking forward to answer your questions in the chat.
All right, thank you so much, Ideal, for this very detailed explanation about your organization and also about what you guys are fighting for. And I have to say that I adore how you explain everything very thoroughly. It's very detailed, and but it's not confusing at all. You don't use like very difficult words, but it's very like close to the listeners, you know. So I thank you for that. I
Thank you
do
so much.
see I do see a few questions. So there, okay, the first question is from Fatul Jannah. uh, the participant asked, does fish farming affect the biodiversity and sustainability of marine life?
Right. It definitely does. There are two methods of farming, which is wild farming or fish farming. The problematic ways of fish farming is that one example that I can give to you is by a quote by an ex Secretary General of FRIM, which is the Forest Research Institute of Malaysia. So they went to this mangrove forest. So they have a paper right in front of this Secretary General. It says that on this paper is a mangrove forest. On this paper, on this report, mangrove forest. When they go to the site, there's no mangrove forest. It's a fish farm for prawns. So what is on paper is definitely not translated in real life. So one of the problematic ways that fish farming is contributing to the decline of biodiversity is mainly the loss of mangrove ecosystem. Um, Mangrove is a great habitat for fish breeding. So that allows for some farmers to degrade the whole area to make sure that it's dedicated to just one species of fish or seafood or food like prawn or ikan and so on. So that's one of the ways that it's contributing to the decline of biodiversity is that we're erasing mangrove ecosystems and replacing them with fish farming. Another way that is problematic is that the disease that fish farming could cause. Uh, Sometimes when fish farming occurs, is that it's a lot of fish in just one, pond or a in one area of just like for just one species of fish, and that's when diseases could happen, and that's when if the nets are not well protected, are not stable and everything, fish can escape from those ponds. And when they escape from those ponds, they can cause diseases to the actual ecosystem. Another issue is invasive species farming, or arapaima, or whether it's species of fish, farming of non-native species of fish. So when they escape to an actual ecosystem and become invasive species, and no other fish wants to eat them, no crocodile wants to eat them or anything. So they repopulate, and they could cause diseases. They could compete with the other native species. So this is one of the problematic ways that I've known to hurt and been addressed to by one of my friends who studied fish farming. So these are the stories that that he always mentions to me. So yeah.
Fatul Jana also added, is it something like chicken farming but dalam air?
I would, well, yeah, I guess so. But for chicken, it's not much of a problem. They're not really invasive species
Mm.
on land. On water, is a trickier ecosystem. Is a whole different planet right there. And chicken is usually well guarded, and despite there are ethical values, because sometimes they're constrained into tiny little boxes. There is an unethical way of chicken farming, but it's pretty much the same if you're talking in that context.
Okay, understood. So thank you for that. Another question by Firzana. I love your sharing on how youth can participate effectively. A question: how do you allocate time to research, curate, and post this content? Because I follow you and I see you doing it all the time, which is amazing. Mind sharing your process?
I don't have the time. Oh my god. Sorry. So I'm 22 years old. I'm just under pressure like anyone else in this room. Self-esteem issues, insecurity. So definitely time planning is not my best trait, even though it's been projected here. But that makes me human, right? It makes me that I have faults of my own. But how I allocate them is usually, um, I'm much of a perfectionist. I don't know if I could share it here, but when I share tweets and everything, I make sure that they're at 12 p.m., 2 p.m., 4 p.m. So they're always at like that zero for like not like 5:37. I feel like already that's my own mental health problem where I couldn't stand seeing a post at 5:37. I have to make sure that it's at 5 p.m. or at that basically perfect number, basically. So I have enough time to plan ahead usually. That's just my way of being a perfectionist. I don't condone that because it eats you alive. But one of the things that I've always done is right now, trying to project my activism better is by writing down notes. I am a writing person, so everything that I write is in my notebook. I don't enjoy writing in my phone or making having a schedule in my phone. I always write it down in my notes. So I have a dedicated notebook that my friend gave, and it's my calendar and everything. So I'm trying to get better in terms of arranging time and not being such a perfectionist when it comes to these things. I am allowed to be chaotic at times. So it's a learning lesson. So it's a very torn book full of things and everything, full of notes and everything. But that's how I manage to do it. So another tip of how I calm down is usually I just read books. It calms me down a lot, whether they're fiction or nonfiction. So writing down in my notes and reading books is definitely a great coping mechanism.
I see. Uh, So basically, you suggest to just write down the things that you have to do beforehand,
Mhm.
right? Okay. So
Right, right.
yeah, I agree with that one because uh I'm not perfectionist like you, but I have a lot of things. I have a lot of things going on juggling in my life. I'm 22 as well, so I think we can agree on that.
Yes,
So
exactly.
yeah, so I agree on like listing things out. Okay. Okay. We have another question. From Sophie Shwada. How do we educate people on how important climate change is? Because there are some of our friends, in our group, especially the close one, that's very hard to convince. They don't care about this kind of stuff. How would
Right.
you, yeah, how would you like recommend?
One of the great ways is, of course, communications. is to make sure that climate change is not an inaccessible elitist classes issue. Is to make sure that it's accessible. It's going away from jargons and everything. This has been translated poorly in our news articles or news, or usually there is a lack of sustainability communications. A lot of reporters just to like quote, just to like to quote from researchers and experts, but don't like to, filter them into accessible terms. So that's one of a systemic issue that's making people don't care about climate change. One of the ways that I always try to connect climate change to people is by addressing the human rights value or how it affects social livelihoods. Sometimes when you think about climate change, the projection of a lot of like young people, especially those in high school or primary school, secondary school, is polar bears, right? Losing their habitat, losing ice and everything. But how do you make sure that young people are aware and putting away from that vision or visual of polar bears? It's making sure that there are more floods that are happening in Malaysia that are more severe and extreme. And there are problems of, because we all here probably like to eat rice, nasi, and we are very dependent on nasi very much for our food sustenance. So 30% of rice crops in Malaysia would fail if global temperatures continue to rise. So that's a problem of food security. So it's basically translating about how you, as an individual, your friend, how are they affected by climate change personally? How are they affected by climate change personally? Do they live in Kuala Lumpur where the city infrastructure cannot withstand floods, cannot withstand extreme weather? So these are like some of the examples that you can give, is to connect with them on how their human rights are threatened. So there are cases of droughts that make sure that causes problems in water security. So if other than pollution, climate change can also enforce droughts where water sources could be lesser and lesser to Malaysians. So I believe that connecting human rights with climate change is always great space to start with people. But it's also how you try to radicalize or make sure that they are aware of it. For example, if they, about climate change, um, is that one, one of the things that people don't know is that 71% of global industrial greenhouse gas emissions are emitted by 100 companies only. 100 companies are responsible of 71% of global industrial greenhouse gas emissions. These companies include Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, and guess what? One of the 100 companies responsible for climate change is Petronas. So that is not being established, to us as well, is that they're listed in the 100 companies in the world responsible for 71% of greenhouse gas emissions. To further make sure people are interested about climate change is that Exxon, Shell, BP knew about climate change 40 years ago and did nothing. They hid the reports. They make sure that the documents were well hidden. They paid millions of dollars to lobby against climate action policies. So it's making sure that corruption is there. So people feel like this is definitely beyond just me and the nature. It's also about big oil companies not being committed to being responsible. Even Petronas being not being one of the exploiters of nature. But we are seeing progress, of course, in terms of new energy across Petronas. But we're also seeing greenwashing in these companies as well. So those kind of arguments or conversations usually just make people really excited. Like, I did not know. So the term carbon footprint, the carbon footprint calculator was designed by an oil company to make sure that you feel guilty for eating meat. So for not taking the public transportation. So that's how systematically problematic these oil companies have been. So that's a great place to start a conversation.
So I would say in like in a just simpler terms, I would say just make it personal to them.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, make it personal
Yeah.
and
So
make them angry.
yeah, true. Because like how we usually do is like we just show them pictures and also like articles that is like so far, like you mentioned just now, polar bears. Like of course,
Hmm.
if I'm not in this place, I would also question like how is polar bears related to me? Like why should I care? But when we make it personal, when we like make it bring it closer to us, to their lives, then they would feel like, this is a huge thing, like we have to care
Right.
about it. I understand. Another question. Does Malaysia have any youth-led organization that advocate for food security?
Sadly, no. Or not that I'm aware of, but definitely could start if you feel inspired today. That Not an organization, but a GLC, a government linked company, Kazana Research Institute, has a dedicated office or um, section on food security. I believe the person, I forgot her name, but she's an amazing person who's really science, who's really science savvy and very active in advocating food security and climate change resilience. So Kazana Research Institute is a place where you can start looking into papers, documents, research, studies on food security, because they have a whole section dedicated on food security alone. So that's perhaps if you feel inspired to make a movement on food security, but there are movements that eradicate food poverty, like Hunger Hurts Malaysia. My friend Imran Shah is a ambassador of that movement, so they do great things, trying to eradicate poverty, to make sure that people have access to food. It's not a food security in terms of like agriculture, climate change based organization, but it's an organizations that you can definitely support. And Kazana Research Institute is where you can just do your homework about policies revolving food security.
So Kazana, sorry, what just now? Let me just type it.
Kazana Research Institute.
Kazana Research Institute. Okay. So that's where we can start, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
finding the studies. Yeah.
So I don't see any more questions so far. If you guys have any question, do just type it out because we have 1 more minute. Oh, it's 10 already. But I just have one question. It just lingers in my
Okay.
head since starting just now. May I
Mhm.
just know how and what makes you start advocating in this organization, basically in my hutan, like what triggers you that I need to do this, like I just want to
Right.
join
And
this.
yeah.
And yeah.
Right. And I see it as the same question as something that Mariam just asked right now. What drives you to still fight for biodiversity?
Yeah.
What drives me to still fight for it is basically it's just that I've just grown passionate about it when I discovered that what I was wearing, what I was doing was unsustainable. I found out when it comes to fast fashion, earlier when I was focusing on advocacy, is I found out that what I was wearing was not just causing environmental problems, but also human rights violations of laborers or people working in factories that happen to be most of them to be women. So when I found out about how human rights coincide and is interconnected with climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, overfishing, and so on, so I found out that there is a connection between nature and people, and that it's been described as inaccessible, as something that has to be separated, but not really. Climate change and human rights are interconnected. They should be treated together instead of as independent issues. So that's really what drives me today. What keeps me consistent at my hutan is the people I work with. Kira, Tarma from Undi 18 are great leaders. My friends Natasha, Shakil, Divya is amazing. So there are amazing people to work with. So that's what's driving me forward, and the opportunities that my hutan is great for my resume, I guess. So that's just a personal note. So it's just amazing to like collectively work with people like them, but also just to be surrounded by feminists like Jasmine Arisha, who's just Ili Nadia, who's really educational, who's very passionate. So when you see someone as passionate as them, you just become as passionate, as driven. So that's how I think that's how I feel. What's driving me today is seeing those people becoming the driving force of conservation, and just saying that I can just be like them. I can do the same things at at the same capacity, if not more.
Mm. I think how you said you want to be like them, it's already mirroring now, because I just talked to my friend. She's also in here. I was like, oh, I wish I can be like him. You uh because like you seem so passionate about it. You made us, basically me and my friends in here, you made us wants to also fight for this, because obviously before this we just know that it's something is going on, something is going wrong, something is wrong, something wrong is going on in the
Mhm.
nature, but we don't know how critical it is until you present it to us. So thank you so much for the presentation today. So it's
No worries.
already 10:03 p.m. I think we can wrap it up for today's session. Again, thank you so much, Ideal, for joining us tonight. It's very educational and very knowledgeable. I hope we can all join to fight for this. Also, if you guys have scanned the QR code just now, so don't forget to fill it up, the Google form. All right, and thank you also for everyone for joining us today. Don't forget, our reading club is every Friday, 9 p.m. to 10 p.m. Unless we send out notice that we don't have a session for that week. So I think that is all for this week. Thank you so much again. Have a nice weekend and take care. Stay safe. Bye. You
Goodbye,
can leave the
everyone. Thank
meeting
you
now.
so much. Stay safe.
Bye. Okay, thank you.